Hello everybody, my name is Oliver Reeve and today I'm going to be showing you how to edit in Premiere Pro CC 2017. I'm going to be showing you how to cut together a quick montage of 21 seconds using the footage that's playing now. So without further ado, I'm going to show you the fundamentals of setting up your project and some housekeeping and terminology which is quite popularly used when editing in Premiere Pro. These transferable skills can also be used when editing on other nonlinear editing programs, so you should hopefully find the terminology that we use today quite beneficial. So firstly, you'll have clicked New Project on the window which shows up before this one, to which now we're going to rename this project, and I'm going to call this Tutorial 1. The next thing to be aware of is the location. Now this is where you save your project. Today I've set this to desktop. To change your settings you can click on Browse and select a destination. From here I'm going to hit OK. So now Premiere Pro is going to load up and we're going to look at the general workspace that can be seen here. And we're going to get using these features very shortly as well. So the first thing to note, you've obviously got your top tabs here which are quite standard. We also have these other tabs which again are used in Premiere Pro to direct you to a sort of different layout which may suit colour grading your effects, audio editing, titles, etc. Much more. So at the moment it should be set to editing and you should be seeing something very similar to this. If you click on these different tabs you'll notice the workspace just changes ever so slightly. So going back to editing, that's where we're primarily going to be staying. Now just a quick note, side note, troubleshooter, if you do move something by accident, because this is an NLE, you can change your layout if you've got dual screens, etc., move things around. Now if you're not seeing something which we saw earlier on, you're not seeing the workspace how it was, what you can do, or if you ever make a mistake, you can just go to Window, Workspaces and Reset to Saved Layouts. This will then reset this editing layout to this. So very quickly, talking about tabs, I'm going to go over these different areas, but just to be first aware that in each one of these monitors or these areas on Premiere Pro, you will notice that there are tabatures at the top of each area. So sorry, tabature system similar to your web browser. So in the top left corner here you have your source monitor. Now the source monitor is popularly used. Now the source monitor is popularly used purely for reviewing the footage. So when you import the footage, you double click it, you can watch it through here before starting to edit it. Your program monitor is the video footage which your audience is going to see, so it's the edited together footage which is from your timeline, which, moving on to timeline, is just here. So this is where your timeline will appear and it will look slightly different to what we see right now. And finally in the bottom left corner you have your import project space. This is where you can keep your bins in a nice structure. You can also use this tab for media browser, so this is where you can locate your footage if you want to, look in your libraries, etc. So today we're just going to be sticking with this project monitor to import our footage. Now before we do start to import footage, I want to go over a few things which I like to do just primarily, and that's creating bins. Now bins is a term which is a nod to the old linear way of editing where you would where the editor would have popped the footage from A-roll, B-roll, etc. into different bins, sorting the film into different bins on a table. So very nice nod which seems to sort of carry along with many of the popular nonlinear editing programs. So firstly, the bins are just another word for folders. So new bin, I'm going to create my first bin and call it footage. I'm going to create another bin and call this music. Another bin and call this sequences. And another bin and I'm going to call this titles, and for now I'm just going to keep these 4 bins. So if I click on this little button here, I can change the view from this quite large view to a list view, which just makes life a little bit easier to see them like this, or I prefer it anyway. And now I'm going to double click this bin, and I've got a very similar view to this, except this is purely for my footage. Now, to import footage into here, you can do it 2 ways. The first way could be to drag it straight from a folder, and you can just drag it straight into here. Or the way I like to do it is to right click, hit import, and select our footage. So I'm just going to choose a few shots. Oops, not all of the shots. I'm just going to choose a few shots from a recent christening I filmed. And you can do something similar to this, obviously, with your own footage, or the footage which I'll provide in the link. So I'm going to import this footage now. And I have one of the clip which I was working on earlier on, which I'll also include. So here we are. So now I have my footage completely imported. Now the reason we sort things into bins just gives us a lot more structure and a lot more organization. So by knowing that my footage is located within this one bin, music in this one, sequence in this one, and titles in this one, it means that my default layout will always be manageable. So clicking on my footage again, you can also from here start to rename your footage if that helps. It's also, it's a good idea to sort through it, make sure that you sort out which footage is usable and which footage you're not going to use, and you can rename it however you like. Today, for the speed of this video, I'm just going to go through it and leave the original camera default titles. So going back to our viewers here in this bin, I'm just going to click on this window, and this gives us a preview or a thumbnail of the videos, which will help in just a second when we get started. Okay, so I've imported my footage. What I need to do next is create a sequence based on one of these clips. Now a sequence is another word for where you will be editing. So it's where you'll be using the timeline to clip your footage together and ultimately give it some structure. So sequence is the term for that process. So what I'm going to do is create a sequence based on the footage, and I recommend that you do this as well with your footage. You can create a sequence by right-clicking New Item and choosing Sequence, but this way means that you have to look through the presets which are already here, and unless you know all of the fundamental settings of your camera that you've used, this process can take a little bit of more time, and there is a quicker way of doing it. So I'm just going to hit OK there, and just delete this, or drag it to the bin here. So the way I'm going to create a sequence, you can do it 2 ways. You can drag a clip here to create a sequence, or, I'll just delete this one very quickly, you can drag the footage onto this new layer icon, and I call it the new layer icon just because it's the same, exact same icon that's used in Photoshop to create a new layer. So you can drag the footage onto this, and again it creates a sequence based on the settings of this clip, so you don't have to do anything in that other window. So from here you'll notice that it's got the exact same name as the clip that I've used just here. Now that can be a bit confusing, so while we're here I just want you to take note of the icons, because these will help you realize, if you're in this viewer, which is a sequence and which is the original clip. Now you can quickly see by looking at the icons that this video clip has both a video icon and an audio icon, whereas this icon just has a timeline which looks similar to what we see here. So another way you can view this is by clicking the list view, and if I scroll down to it you'll notice that Premiere Pro actually gives your sequence a different colour to your footage. So I'm just going to drag this sequence now and drag it into the sequences bin just underneath here. I'm going to close off this footage for a second and open up my sequence bin, and I'm going to rename this, again for housekeeping, I'm going to rename this the rough cut. So we call the first sequence a rough cut because I don't want you to worry about making the rough cut a perfected piece. Traditionally, you would work on the rough cut, get the general pace and structure of the video that you're making correct, and then you would go on to move on to colour grading, colour correction, sound correction, and then do your master cut at the end. So for now, we have our rough cut, and if I just close this bin for a second, you'll notice that the sequence tab now says rough cuts. So when you are working with sequences, if you make multiple sequences, you'll notice that they'll dock on here like tabs. So just knowing what sequence you're working on up here is good to know. So now I can delete this clip, as it's not the clip that I want to work with. And we have a sequence and a timeline ready. So going back to my footage, we are just trying to create a quick montage of 20 seconds with the footage here that we have. So what we need to do now, or what we can start doing now, is looking at the clips and marking our in and out points. So I'm going to choose this clip initially, and now in the source monitor, and I'm just going to mute my audio so it doesn't interfere with this recording. Now in this monitor I can watch what's happening, and this clip goes from in focus through a focus pull to out of focus to around here. So what I can do in this instance is reverse the footage, which will give me a little bit more flexibility later on. Now I wouldn't recommend reversing footage with people in it, or with a time lapse with clocks and things like that, because obviously people would move backwards and the clock would move backwards. Now in this case, if I reverse the speed, because there's only really this plant that's moving around, it's not going to cause too much distraction for the audience, and I doubt if the viewers would realise that the shot has been reversed. So if I go back to around here, just near the beginning, what I'm going to do now is mark in and out points. So firstly, I'm going to mark an in point with I on the keyboard, and go to here, around here, and mark and press O. So I on the keyboard marks your in point, which is here, and O on the keyboard marks your output, which is here. And you'll notice that I've now got a grey section here. So what I can do now is drag this footage from the centre and drag it to the timeline and press play. And this is the clip that I've just marked my in and outputs. So if we go back to footage very quickly, I want to show you something that will have happened now. So you'll notice in your footage, when you hover your mouse over the top, you can scrub through the footage, and you get this blue bar which goes across the whole of the bottom of your clip. Now when you mark in and out points on your footage, you'll notice that the blue bar actually just shows the in and out points. If I go back up to this one, you can see here that the blue starts where I marked input and ends where I marked outputs. So that's quite helpful if you want to sort of mark your in and out points on your clips first before dragging them into the timeline. Again, work into your preferences. I prefer to do it in a quite structured, linear way, so I like to go through it step by step. But if you're more like the other way, you can do that as well. So just a quick sidestep. You'll also notice when I dragged in from the middle, it's brought the audio track with it. Now, if you want the audio, that's fine. If you just want the video, what I suggest you doing is dragging from the video only icon here, and that will just bring the video. You can also do this for audio if you just wanted the audio only. If you do though, however, drag it in because you feel like you want the audio, then later on feel that you don't need the audio any longer, what you can do is hold on a Windows computer, hold Control and L, and this will unlink both these clips and allow you to delete one of the clips, one or the other. If you don't do this, so I'm just going to reset this for a second, so they're both linked. If you don't unlink them by pressing Control or Command L, then what will happen when you press delete is you'll delete your whole clip. And then you have to press Control Z to undo what you've done. So if you do decide that you later on that you don't need the audio or the video, just Control L, Command L and delete, like so. Now the next thing I want to do is reverse this footage. Now when you right click footage in your timeline, you get lots of different options which you can see here. The one we're going to look at is speed and duration, or speed/duration. and this is also used for slowing and speeding up footage, but in this case we want to reverse the speed. If we had footage at either side of this clip, also make sure that you tick ripple edit, shifting trailing clips, and this will make sure that you don't leave gaps or overwrite footage with the clip, and hit OK. So now when we press play, we're seeing the clip how we would like it, starting out of focus and moving into focus. So what I'm going to do now is essentially put the rest of the footage onto the timeline, exactly how I've just done here, marking in and out points on the footage and getting it to a sequence which I'm happy with. Now, you don't need to see this section, so I'm going to speed through this and you're going to see me once I have a finished timeline, so to speak. So now I have a timeline which is similar to what we saw at the beginning of this tutorial, which plays out like so. And I just want to go over a few more features which you can do on the timeline to cut together and make it your own. So this sequence is cutting from one clip to the other, jumping from one clip to the other if you like. Now very quickly, I'm not going to stick with this, but sometimes you'll find two clips just don't cut together nicely, and instead a cross dissolve or a crossfade might be something that you would like to do instead. Now to do this, you can drag one clip on top of another clip like so, and I'm going to show you a technique which stays away from using the presets which are in the effects library. So I prefer to stay away from presets because this gives you a lot more flexibility. Now to increase the size of your clips, all I'm doing is using the middle scroll button and scrolling over this area. If I scroll here, all it does is move my timeline up and down, but scrolling here enlarges and decreases the size of my track. Now, you should all be able to see this line going through your footage. If you can't see this, simply click on the spanner here and make sure that show video keyframes and show audio keyframes and are ticked. If they're not ticked, you'll see something which looks like this, and you won't be able to follow along with the next bit. So to create a cross dissolve, we're going to use the pen tool, which is just on the left hand side here. Now be careful with the pen tool because it is quite a destructive tool and can add lots of keyframes. Keyframe is another term for animating something, which we're doing here in a very basic format. So what I'm going to do is put a keyframe here and a keyframe here and drag this end to 0. And what this does is it will fade the clip above into the clip below. So at 0% we can still see this clip here, and as this increases its opacity or transparency, it becomes this clip here. It's a really easy way to cross dissolve footage on top of each other if you like to. So I'm just going to Control Z this to show, but this essentially this can also be used to fade in and fade out, which we'll be doing later on as well. So bearing that technique in mind, now I'm going to drop the music onto the timeline. And again, before I do that, just make sure you go back to your selection tool, which is up here, keyboard shortcut V. The pen tool is keyboard shortcut P, so P for pen and V for selection tool. So now I'm going to double click my music bin, to which point I dragged some royalty-free music from bensound.com called November, and I've already marked an in point and it's only 20 seconds, so looking at where the in point is, it's 11 seconds 14. You can see this because this popped up here. If I go off that, it disappears, so that's my exact in point. Now if I add 23 seconds onto this, it will be 34 seconds and 14 milliseconds. And then if I hit enter, it will take the cursor to there, and I'm going to hit O for output. So now when I drag this footage, this audio should I say, onto the audio track, it's roughly what I'm looking for. And this allows us to play through like so. Now I want the music to fade in, so I'm going to use the same technique as earlier on and drag my pen tool to fade in the music and fade out the music like so. And that's pretty much it. We've ultimately cut together a very basic 20-second sequence. Now, say for example, some more features that you can use on the timeline. Say for example, this clip, it goes on for a little bit too long and I want to decrease it to about here, so it stays very similar to these clips here. Now, using my selection tool, selection pointer should I say, when I hold near the edges of a clip, you can see how it turns red. If I grab this and drag it to my cursor, what it will do is cut the scene out at that point. Unfortunately, it leaves my footage behind. So I can do something called a ripple delete by clicking this empty space and hitting delete, which snaps the footage to this. Or I can do something else, which is called the ripple tool, the ripple edit tool. And to access the ripple edit tool, it's this option here, or B on the keyboard, and this time the edges become orange, and when I drag this edge to the cursor, it will snap the footage along with it. And now I don't need to worry about any of the footage trailing behind being split off by accident. Now, if you don't want to do either of these things, but instead make a sequence of cuts in your scene, so I wanted to make it maybe like an eye blink effect, what you can do is use the razor tool, which is C on the keyboard, or it's over here on the left hand side, and I can make an incision or make a multiple of incisions on the timeline itself without shifting the footage around, and this will then allow me to delete these individual clips. Again, depending on how you stylistically want your sequence to look, it'll look something like this when I've finished with it. So in this instance, possibly not very aesthetically pleasing, but a really easy way to cut your footage and add space between them if that's the effect that you're looking for. This could also be applied to text layers and things like that if you wanted to create a blinking effect, or you could also use the keyframing and opacity that we saw earlier on. So there's some more tools that you have the options to use here on the left hand side, and some more keyboard shortcuts rather. Now, at this stage, keep playing around with the software, get to know it, and in future videos we'll look at colour grading and some more intricate details which we've not covered in today's fast track basic training tutorials. I've been Oliver Reeve, thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you later on.